The first fragments of flesh appeared during the 42nd night of the campaign on Vacaris 6. I was awake in the Triage bunker, cataloging casualties and noting the dwindling reserves of coagulants, when the Vox crackled with a message to distort it to be useful. The only word that carried through the static was gardens, a strange word to hear in a place like this. Vacaris had no greenery, no soil that could bear crops, only endless ash bogs and ruinous winds that stripped paint from armor. Still, the platoon that had sent the transmission was due back from their rotation before dawn, and so I waited, as physicians must wait, half hopeful and half dreading what the dawn would reveal. They did not return. At first light, we marched out to the trenches where they had held the line. The air was clouded with humidity, heavy as a fevered breath. Our boots sank into mud that seemed to sweat beneath us. The trench was empty of life. Weapons and packs remained, neatly stacked. Rations were untouched. Helmets rested in a row upon the firing step as though placed with reverence. But there were no men inside them. What we found instead was whole, unbroken skins, stripped of muscle and bone, stretched taut across the firing slats. Each one was nailed into place with bayonets, spread like parchment. They hung not in chaos but in precise arrangements, circles, arcs, and intersecting lines, patterns so geometrically exact that even the mechanicus adepts muttered uneasily. There was no blood. That disturbed me more than anything. Flaying is messy. Flesh tears ragged, vessels rupture, marrow leaks. Yet these skins bore no stain upon the earth. It was as though they had been lifted cleanly away, separated without violence. My training failed me. No scalpel could have achieved such separation. Commissar Drevin barked the order to burn the remains, to deny the enemy whatever message this display was meant to send. But when we set fire to the skins, the flames did not consume them. They curled and darkened, yet when the smoke cleared, the flesh remained unburned, as though flame itself had been rejected. Drevin spat a prayer to the throne and turned away, but I kept staring, because in the curling of that flesh I saw something I should not have. The pores of the skin were still open, dilating and contracting like lungs drawing breath. We withdrew to the command bunker, shaken. The captain demanded reports. I recorded mine with clinical precision. 23 guardsmen missing, presumed dead. Skins recovered, preserved against fire. No enemy contact noted. I wanted to add something about the geometry, about the impossible precision, but I restrained myself. Even writing these words now, I fear the act of documentation gives them more solidity than they deserve. That night, the Vox sputtered again. I was asleep when it woke me, the tone rising in urgent pulses. At first I thought it was nothing but the usual warp static, the echo of storm fronts across the upper atmosphere. But then words emerged, carried on the distortion. My own name, spoken in my own voice, repeated again and again, followed by that single, incomprehensible word, gardens. The Auspex operator swore he heard nothing unusual, but I know what I heard. I did not sleep again. On the 44th night, patrols reported light in the marshes. Lanterns, they thought at first, bobbing in the distance. But as we approached, we saw they were no lanterns at all. They were pale sheets, strung between stakes of bone. In the moonlight, they glowed with an inner translucence, as though each membrane contained a thin fluid just beneath the surface. Dozens of them, swaying in the breeze, arranged like an orchard in careful rows. The men faltered. One vomited inside his respirator and nearly drowned before we dragged the mask free. We advanced anyway, compelled by duty. The air grew hotter, damp with a scent I recognized. Formaldehyde, preservative. Yet there were no vials, no Medicaid stores here. Only the orchard, and the way it sighed when we passed among it. Membranes trembling as though stirred by invisible breath. I touched one. I should not have, but I did. It was warm. To warm, the heat of a living body. And as my glove brushed its surface, I felt veins within, delicate and branching. The sheet shivered under my touch and tightened, like muscle contracting in pain. The veterans muttered litanies. One recited the catechism of fire, begging the Emperor's light to purge this sight. But again our flames failed us. Promethium hissed and roared, burning bright. Yet when the fire died, the orchard remained untouched, its membranes glistening as though washed clean. We fell back, shaken. I tried to write my report in sterile language structures of organic tissue encountered. Immune to combustion, probable Xeno's origin, but the words felt false. What we had seen was not Xeno's. It was human. All the human dot as we retreated. The Vox units on our backs began to hum. Not static, not distortion, a chant. Low, rhythmic, like monks intoning in a crypt. We halted, checking our dials, but the sound came from all channels, all frequencies. Then we recognized the words. They were ours, our own squad's voices, chanting together. Phrases none of us remembered speaking. The same impossible liturgy etched upon the hides in the trench. I am recording this now under the light of a single lumen, hands shaking though I forced the script to remain legible. The men have stopped speaking to me. They glance at one another as though I am already infected. Perhaps I am, for even now, I hear my name whispered from the Vox unit beside me, carried on a chant that is too steady to be accident. The orchard is not dead. It breathes. It waits. Tomorrow we will march deeper into the marshes to trace the source of the Vox signal. Captain says it is enemy trickery. Commissar says it is heresy. I, as decay, must say nothing, must record only, must bear witness. Yet in the marrow of my bones I already know what we will find. I write this in hope the act of setting down words will anchor me, remind me of what is real. But the memory of those skins, arranged like leaves upon branches, breathing with the heat of life, lingers behind my eyes. If I close them, I see the orchard swaying in rows, and I hear the chant. Always the chant, "Dot we go tomorrow." If these words survive me, let them serve as warning. On Vacarus, men do not die. They are harvested. The march to the orchard took half a day, though distance seems strangely distorted. Auspex readings claimed we had covered no more than 2 kilometers. Yet our chronometers marked 6 hours of progress through the swamps. The bog dragged at our boots, clinging like rotted sinew. Every step sank us ankle deep, and every lift came free with a sound like flesh tearing. By the time we reached the rise where the orchard grew, the men were exhausted. Though none dared speak of turning back, the orchard stood before us in terrible order. Rows upon rows of pale membranes, each stretched between stakes of bone. Swaying though no wind moved, the sight triggered something instinctual, an agricultural memory. Neat farmland rose, crops cultivated with care. But these were no crops. Each membrane bore pores, veins, and hair follicles. Not stretched hides, not remnants, but cultivated sheets of living skin. The nearest swayed as though in greeting. The commissar barked orders to advance. Plasma coils whined as we swept the perimeter. The tech priests began chanting Ben-Hara canticles, their mechadendrites weaving Auspex rays. My medical training urged me forward, curiosity stronger than fear. Though I wished later I had resisted, closer inspection revealed the truth. These skins were not harvested from bodies. They were grown. Veins did not end at their edges, but burrowed into the earth like roots. Beneath the marsh water, threads of cartilage and bone extended downward, forming a hidden network. The orchard was not decoration. It was a living organism. We attempted fire again. Promethium sprayed across a row, engulfing half a dozen membranes in roaring flame. The men shouted in relief, convinced the sight of blackened tissue meant victory. But when the smoke cleared, the skins were untouched. Their surfaces gleamed, unscarred, moist as though washed in rain. The fire had been denied. The commissar cursed aloud. The veterans made the sign of the aquila. I noted the temperature in my journal. The orchard gave off heat like a body fevering. It was then the Auspex operator froze. His eyes widened, mouth opening without sound. I took the slate from him. The readings showed not static, but pulse. Heartbeat like tremors, synchronized across every sheet of skin. Each membrane contracted in rhythm, a colossal cardiovascular system made visible. The orchard lived, and it lived in time with something larger. Then came the chant. At first it was only faint, as though the wind whispered through reeds. But there was no wind, and the words were clear. The men stiffened, looking to one another. The chant was in our own voices. I heard my own tongue speaking phrases I did not know, echoing from the membranes themselves. Each sheet vibrated like a vocal cord, producing sound. The orchard was a choir, and it sang in the timbre of the living. One of the guardsmen broke ranks. His name was Karen, a quiet man who had written poetry in the downtime between shelling. He stumbled forward as though drunk. The commissar shouted for him to return, but Karen shook his head. "I hear her," he said. "I hear my mother." And then he ran, plunging between the rows. We followed, weapons raised. The membrane swayed violently as he passed, brushing against him, clinging like wet fabric. His laskin fell into the mud. We forced our way in after him, but it was as though the rows shifted, disorienting us. Distances warped, rows multiplied, and the orchard deepened. My Auspex slate blinked uselessly, coordinates slipping with every step. When we found him, he stood still, eyes wide. Before him hung a single sheet of skin. Upon its surface moved shapes faint discolorations forming an image. A woman's face, smiling. Her lips moved, and her words came in his mother's voice. Karen dropped to his knees, weeping. The commissar raised his bolt pistol, intent on putting an end to the madness. But before he could fire, the membrane flexed and wrapped around Karen like a shroud. He did not struggle. He simply sighed, as though reunited with something he had lost. When we tore him free, he was still breathing, but he was no longer whole. His skin was gone. His body stood stripped to red musculature, tendons glistening, eyes still wet with tears. He spoke, not in his own voice, but in Ben-Herrick bursts, the sound of cogitators spitting machine code. The tech priest recoiled as though struck. I leaned closer despite my horror. His words were fragments, coordinates, sequences, liturgical fragments about sowing and harvest. He looked at me and whispered in clear low Gothic, "The garden is not grown. It is growing us." The commissar ended him with a single round. But his death did not end the horror. At the moment of impact, when bolt met flesh, his body unfurled. Not an explosion, a blossoming. His musculature spread like petals, sinews unfolding with obscene grace, until he was gone, absorbed into the nearest membrane. It rippled, brightened, and fell still. Karen had become part of the orchard. Panic threatened the squad. Veterans muttered about taint, about demons, about chaos, but the tech priests shook their heads, stammering in Ben-Herrick that this was not the work of the ruinous powers. They insisted the structure followed patterns to regular, to mathematically precise. Ritual, yes, but ritual in service to something older, something that predated the eye. I do not know if they were right. I only know that we stood surrounded by an orchard that sang with our voices, immune to fire, immune to destruction, capable of transforming men into its own living stock. And the chant grew louder with each passing moment, vibrating in my bones, echoing in my skull. We withdrew under cover of night. The orchard did not pursue. It only swayed, row upon row, lit faintly by the moon, singing to itself in our voices. As we trudged back through the marsh, the air felt thicker, heavy with humidity and the stink of sweat. My boots squelched with each step, as though I walked not in mud, but in the tissues of a body. Back at the bunker, the Auspex slate continued to pulse, heartbeat, not random, not storm noise, a measured, steady rhythm resonating from beneath the ground itself. I lie awake now, scratching these words on a parchment under the guttering lumen. The men are restless. Some mutter prayers, others pretend to sleep, but twitch as though their dreams are not their own. I cannot shake the sense that the orchard has followed us without moving, that its breath clings to our skin. Tomorrow the captain insists we return. He wants proof, evidence to transmit to high command. The commissar demands we burn it again, no matter the futility. The tech priests whisper about excavation, about discovering the source of the heartbeat. For my part, I am afraid. Afraid not of dying, but of being harvested. Afraid that when my time comes, I will be spread across those rows, vibrating with song. My voice, echoing forever, and still the vox crackles. Not static, not distortion. A litany, whispered endlessly. We are the garden. We are the harvest. We are the soil. The order to attempt another purge came at dawn. Captain Belth ordered all reserves of promethium gathered, along with plasma coils and melted charges. The commissar stood beside him, hands clenched on his bolt pistol, jaw tight with fury. The previous night's chanting had driven several guardsmen half mad, and one had been executed for carving litanies into his own forearms. The orchard's voices had not ceased through the night. They did not carry on air. They vibrated through the very bones of the ground, a chorus that followed us into our dreams. We returned to the marshes in tight formation, weapons raised, respirators hissing. The air was heavy with mist, thicker now, clinging to our lenses, making every surface slick. The orchard rose from the fog like pale sails, glistening, trembling with unseen breath. I felt my stomach tighten at the sight, but duty compelled me forward. As Medicae, my duty was to witness, to record, to preserve data even if none of us survived to deliver it. Flamers roared. Promethium drenched the nearest rows, coating every sheet in searing fire. This time the flames burned longer, fed by desperation. Men shouted hymns to the emperor, voices strained with fury and fear. The orchard convulsed. The membranes twisted, contracting, rippling like muscle under a lash. For a moment it seemed they would burn. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope. Then the fire collapsed inward, not consumed, absorbed. The flames themselves seemed sucked into the flesh. drawn down the branching veins like blood in reverse. The orchard glowed, each sheet luminous with inner heat, veins pulsing like molten arteries. When the fire died, the flesh was untouched, restored to perfection. Only our men were burned, splashed by reflected flame. Their screams carried across the marsh, joining the orchard's chant. The tech priests adjusted their auspex arrays, muttering in machine code. They reported metabolic activity, energy conversion, a closed system feeding on whatever touched it. Fire was not destruction. It was nourishment. I shuddered, realizing that in trying to purge, we had only made it stronger. The commissar executed the most badly burned guardsman, his bolt round silencing the man's agony. But the corpse was gone within minutes, drawn into the mud, veins sprouting from the soil to wrap him. I saw it with my own eyes, tendrils piercing muscle, threading bone, pulling him downward until nothing remained but ripples in the marsh. The orchard did not simply accept sacrifice. It harvested every casualty. Then came a new horror. Upon the membranes nearest the burning site, shapes began to form. At first they were blotches, shadows beneath translucent flesh, but gradually they sharpened into words. The letters were burned into the tissue, scarification forming script across the stretched hides. I approached, against orders, drawn by morbid compulsion. The words were in High Gothic. They read, harvest in order, flesh in harmony, soil in perfection. The commissar ordered the sheet shredded by chainsword. We obeyed, slashing into the membranes, but the cuts healed instantly, closing like wounds. My decay knowledge recoiled. No flesh heals that fast, not even enhanced tissue of the Astartes. This was something outside biology, something ritualistic, something that obeyed rules older than science. As I withdrew my blade, I saw more script forming across other sheets, sentences, fragments, phrases that sounded like prayers, but not prayers to the emperor, not to chaos either. They were directed to something unnamed, a gardener referenced only in whispers. The gardener sows, the gardener prunes, the gardener waits. The captain ordered the orchard mapped. He believed knowledge might grant advantage. The tech priests used auspex triangulation, overlaying each sheet's position onto their data slates. Slowly the pattern emerged, not random rows, not chaotic growth. The orchard was arranged as a map. Every sheet, every line of stretched flesh corresponded to terrain features on Vacaricics. Rivers mirrored veins, mountain ranges became bones, high ruins marked as organs. The realization froze us. The orchard was the planet, or rather, a living replica of it, grown in flesh. The land itself was being flayed and translated into this obscene garden. I studied the map with dread. One thing stood out. Growth nodes blossomed on the representation of our current position. A perfect overlay. The orchard was not a symbol. It was an instruction, a plan unfolding. The commissar denied it, calling it madness. But the tech priests whispered otherwise. They theorized the orchard was not mere artifice, but terraforming through ritual biology, reshaping the planet itself into living matter. Their voices quavered with awe as much as fear. Even they could not deny the elegance of the design. As we stood arguing, the chant rose louder. The membrane swayed, vibrating with unnatural harmony. My own name whispered through the noise, woven into the hymn. I tried to ignore it, but the more I resisted, the clearer it became. I heard words I did not know, syllables that rolled like pulse and breath. They sank into me, filling the cavities of my skull. One guardsman dropped to his knees, tearing at his own uniform. He screamed that his skin no longer belonged to him, that it was being pulled outward, drawn to join the orchard. He clawed himself bloody before Drevin shot him. The corpse fell into the mud, and tendrils reached for it immediately. We dragged the body away, burning the ground beneath it, but the mud still pulsed. As though hungering, the captain gave the order to retreat. But retreat was not simple. The orchard's rows had shifted again, closing behind us, opening new paths that disoriented. Distances folded. We moved in circles, though we swore we marched straight. The fog deepened until our formation broke, each squad isolated. Voices called out in the mist our comrades' tomes, begging for help, but they came from every direction at once. I clutched the auspex slate, desperate for bearings. Its readings fluctuated wildly, coordinates scrambling, maps distorting. But one detail remained consistent. The heartbeat. Slow, immense, seismic pulses resonating beneath the marsh. Whatever the orchard was, it grew from something buried deep within the planet. At last we stumbled free, mud-caked and shivering, our lines frayed. The orchard's chant followed, softer now, as though mocking us with distance. The captain raged at our failure. Drevin executed another guardsman for panicking. The tech priests argued furiously, demanding excavation to locate the buried heart. I withdrew into my bunker, hands shaking. I attempted to write my report, but found my script faltering, words breaking into curves that resembled the scarred symbols from the hides. It was only when I forced myself to stop that I realized my hand had continued writing on its own, sketching patterns across the parchment, the same geometry as the orchard rose. I hear the chant still, louder now. It comes not only from the Vox or the orchard, it comes from within. Each heartbeat, each breath, echoes the rhythm of that terrible litany. I fear the truth. The garden is not outside us. It is inside us already, and it is growing. The next night brought no rest. The barracks shook with nightmares. Men cried out in their sleep, their bodies convulsing as though wires were threaded through their muscles. I was called to attend one guardsman who would not wake. His eyelids fluttered, his mouth moving in silent cadence. When I forced his jaws open, I found his tongue etched with script, tiny letters carved into the flesh, arranged in neat rows. They glistened with fresh blood, but showed no sign of pain. He did not resist when the commissar put a round through his skull. His body slumped, but the tongue continued to twitch, spelling out words even as it cooled. The captain convened us before dawn. He spoke of another expedition, though the men barely held their discipline. Too many had seen comrades claimed. Too many heard their own names sung by the orchard. Fear gnawed the regiment, yet duty chained us as firmly as any commissarial threat. We would march again. The tech priests insisted the heartbeat buried beneath the marsh was key. They spoke of excavation, of digging down until the source was exposed. They described it as an engine, a living reactor that fed the flesh above. I did not argue, though I doubted shovels and drills would prevail against something that devoured fire itself. Still, orders were orders. We moved with the dawn, carrying seismic charges, melted drills, and enough explosives to level a hablock. The orchard loomed as ever, patient, gleaming in its wet stillness. Fog draped it in curtains. The chanting had grown softer, almost lulling, like a hymn sung for infants. I felt my limbs loosen as we approached, as though the air itself sedated us. Several guardsmen stumbled into the mud, sluggish, eyes half closed. I dosed them with stems until their pulses steadied at the chosen site. The tech priests planted augers. The readings confirmed the seismic pulses, rhythmic, vast, organic. They marked the ground and set the drills to work. Steel bit into mud, then into stone, shrieking as sparks leapt. The sound seemed to disturb the orchard. The heights quivered, swelling like lungs inhaling. Their chant shifted pitch, no longer soothing. Now it grated, a chorus of knives drawn across glass. The first drill operator collapsed after only minutes. His flesh rippled, skin sliding as though something beneath strained to emerge. His eyes bulged, rolled back, then burst, wet pulp dripping down his cheeks. From his sockets, tendrils sprouted thin cords of vein and gristle, reaching toward the ground. The commissar fired without hesitation, but even in death the tendrils burrowed into soil. Writhing like worms, more men faltered. I rushed between them, injecting stems, cauterizing ruptures, praying under my breath. My prayers tasted hollow. The emperor's name felt brittle when spoken here, swallowed by that unending chant. The drills struck something hard beneath the earth. Not stone, not metal, flesh. The bit tore into it, and the ground itself shuddered. A sound rose not from the orchard, not from the men, but from below. A groan, immense, like mountains shifting. The earth convulsed. Mud fontained upward, spattering us in black ichor. The orchard screamed, yes, screamed. Every membrane, every hide, shrieked in unison. It was not sound alone, it was vibration, force, pressure. My bones rattled, my vision blackened at the edges. Men clutched their ears, some tearing them bloody in futile attempts to escape the noise. Several simply dropped dead, hearts bursting from the resonance. The tech priests rejoiced, babbling that we had awakened the heart. Their glee turned to panic when the ground cracked. Something vast and wet heaved beneath us. I staggered back as fissures split open, revealing pale flesh stretching into darkness. It pulsed, each beat shaking the marsh. Veins thicker than trees coiled upward, slamming into the drills, crushing them like toys. Sparks burst, flames sputtered, but the heart absorbed even those. Glowing brighter with every strike, we opened fire. Last bolts rained against flesh, leaving only dim scars. Plasma seared, but sank into the tissue, absorbed like water into sand. Grenades tore chunks free, yet even those wounds closed within seconds. Nothing we did slowed its rhythm. The captain ordered charges set. The men obeyed, trembling, planning to melt the warheads around the fissure. But the ground shifted again, sucking half the explosives into the soil before they could be armed. We detonated what remained. The blast lit the marsh like dawn, heat searing my skin even through Carapace. For a heartbeat, silence. Then the orchard sang louder than ever. The blast had not destroyed it. It had fed it. New rows of flesh unfurled like blooming flowers, rising from the ground in great sheets, dripping, glistening. They stretched high above us, towering, blotting out the gray sky, and across them appeared new words. All flesh returns to the gardener. The men broke. Some fled into the fog, their screams fading into silence. Others dropped to their knees, begging for mercy from something that would never grant it. The commissar shot 3 in quick succession, then turned his pistol on me when I did not join his recitations of the Imperial Creed. I swore loyalty through clenched teeth, and his attention shifted elsewhere. We retreated again, dragging what wounded we could. The orchard did not pursue, but its chant followed, louder, closer, inside us. I checked the wounded as we staggered back to the barracks. Their skin crawled, literal ripples moving across their flesh. One soldier's arm split at the seam, peeling open to reveal not muscle, not bone, but fresh hide already stretched taut. I burned it with my torch. He screamed until his throat tore, then begged me to kill him. I obliged Dot in my bunk that night. I could not write. My hands shook violently. Yet when I awoke near dawn, my sheets were covered in script, not written with ink, but with skin. Strips of my own flesh, peeled from my arms, arranged in neat rows across the cot. I had no memory of carving them. The wounds had already healed, smooth and seamless, leaving me unscarred. The words spell, "You are already planted." I destroyed the sheets, burned them to ash. But the words remain in my mind, etched deeper than any scar. When I look at my comrades, I see the same truth dawning in their eyes. We are not fighting the garden. We are part of it. Every breath we take, every wound we suffer, every thought we think, it all feeds back into the design. And the gardener, whatever it is, waits beneath us still, tending its harvest. The day began with silence, an unnatural pause that pressed against the bones. Normally, the marsh hummed with insect and wind, but today it was absent. Men whispered about omens. The captain's orders remained firm: reconnaissance. We were to return to the orchard, map its expansion, and attempt to determine the reach of its influence. Several guardsmen had vanished overnight, drawn into the mist or perhaps into the orchard itself. Their absence was noted clinically, without mourning. Survival demanded detachment. Still, attention ran through the ranks, palpable, like static before a lightning strike. The fog thickened as we approached the outer rows. Visibility shrank to a few meters. The orchard swayed gently, almost lazily, but that rhythm carried menace. The chant had stopped, replaced by low murmurs beneath the ground, felt through our boots and bones rather than heard. It was as if the heart beneath us had shifted closer, brushing against the marsh's surface. Tech Priest Adept Valen deployed Auspex probes. The readings indicated not only pulse, but growth, active cell replication on an immense scale. Patterns unfolded that mimicked hive sectors, battlefields, and even our own barracks. The orchard was not only a copy of the planet, it was a living map, tracking our every move, updating in real time. Men shivered as strands of mist coiled around their legs, clinging, sticky. One soldier, a veteran named Kyle, tripped and fell into a hollow. When we pulled him free, his uniform was intact, but his arms were missing skin. Not flayed violently, but peeled and stretched neatly along the marsh floor, reattaching slowly, as if the orchard had borrowed it temporarily. He whimpered, bloodless and pale, and we had to drag him onward. The orchard's new growth was grotesque. Sheets of membrane formed arches over the marsh paths, creating tunnels of flesh. Their surfaces were marked with glyphs, geometric symbols that pulsed faintly. The symbols moved subtly, shifting positions, elongating, shrinking. One glance at them made the brain ache, as if attempting to interpret their logic triggered nausea. Valen insisted these were not random, but sequences, code of some kind. Instructions embedded within the tissue. I saw something in one of the arches that made me stop. A visage appeared on the membrane, indistinct at first, then sharpening, the face of our missing sergeant, eyes wide with terror, mouth open in a silent scream. When I reached to touch it, the image convulsed and disappeared, leaving the surface smooth again. The men stepped closer, only to see the same phenomenon on every arch, fleeting, horrible glimpses of themselves or others, trapped, panicked as we advanced deeper. The soil beneath us trembled, not like an earthquake, but like living muscle. The auspex picked up irregularities. The orchard was not merely on the surface. It extended deep, tendrils probing down, embedding in aquifers and rock, feeding on the planet itself. The chant returned, faint, carried by the ground, a chorus of low, synchronous pulses, echoing in hearts and skulls. Suddenly, one of the soldiers collapsed. His body spasmed violently, muscles contracting beyond control. His uniform split at the seams as skin peeled upward, rising into the air before snapping back in place. He shrieked, half human, half membrane, his voice merging with the orchard's chant. The commissar ordered immediate execution, but even as we fired, the orchard's veins emerged through the marsh, drawing the man down into the mud. His screams ended abruptly, replaced by a low, humming resonance. We pressed on, driven by orders and terror alike. I tried to document everything: geometry of the arches, placement of glyphs, soil temperature changes, pulse readings. Every observation seemed insufficient. The orchard defied empirical description. The membranes reacted to our presence, their growth accelerating when we moved too fast, shifting when we paused. It was adaptive, sentient, ritualistic. That we found the first body, not of a soldier, but something we recognized as human in origin, though malformed. The skin was pale, smooth, stretched like wax over an internal lattice. Eyes remained open, staring, unblinking. The mouth opened and closed, emitting a faint, guttural chant. Valen called it a mimetic specimen, something the orchard had already converted into part of its pattern. The sight unsettled the men. Even the commissar hesitated, though briefly. Before enforcing discipline, we discovered more. Hollowed-out corpses, their skins repurposed as membranes for new arches, veins linking them to surrounding sheets. Some displayed glyphs tattooed across their flesh. Others bore sequences carved by unknown hands, resembling rituals I had only read about in forbidden texts. The orchard was not only growing itself, it was rewriting flesh into script, embedding knowledge, memory, or perhaps commands into the very tissue of its harvest. By midday, we reached the orchard's center, marked by a plateau of mud and roots. The membranes here were tallest, highest above our heads, and thickest, pulsating with a rhythm that almost pushed at the chest. Here the chant was a roar, resonating through the earth and our bones. Every man staggered, breathless. We could see the faint outlines of shapes beneath the largest membranes, figures kneeling, standing, absorbed, perhaps willingly, perhaps trapped. Valen approached, trembling, and whispered that the auspex readings indicated a central note, a heart, buried deeper than anything previously recorded, pulsing with enormous energy. The orchard's growth was linked directly to it. Every flayed body, every harvested membrane, every song and whisper, it fed the heart. And the heart, in turn, controlled the orchard, guiding it, shaping it, calculating, adapting. The captain ordered notes to be taken, measurements logged, yet my hands shook violently. I scribbled what I could while listening to the chant, the pulse, feeling it travel up my legs, through my spine. The orchard was not merely biological. It was a mind, vast, patient, and observant. And it knew we were here. As we prepared to withdraw, one of the youngest soldiers screamed. I turned to see his body rigid, veins rising beneath the skin, eyes wide. A single membrane had extended a tendril toward him. Before we could act, it touched his chest. His screams ended in a gurgle as his body began to unfold, merging with the membrane. He became part of the orchard. The rest of the men stared, frozen in horror. I write this now, in the bunker, knowing that tomorrow we must return. Each journey leaves more of ourselves behind, traces absorbed by the orchard. The heartbeat beneath the marsh grows louder, and with it, the certainty, this is no mere anomaly. It is an organism, a ritual, a godlike intelligence composed of flesh, and it is patient. It waits for us to make the next move, and we are already too deep to retreat. The day began with dread settling like ash on the shoulders of the men. No one slept, yet all moved through the barracks with hollow eyes. The orchard's pulse had reached us even here, carried through the mud and stone, resonating in our bones. Every breath reminded us of it. Every heartbeat echoed in time with the unseen choir beneath Vacarus. I recorded our observations, though the words felt inadequate. Shadows of reality filtered through fear. Captain Belth ordered reconnaissance into the newly mapped nodes despite recent losses. The tech priest insisted that these points were essential to understanding the orchard's growth patterns. a lattice of flesh that sprawled beneath the marshes. They theorized that the nodes functioned like root meristems, distributing nutrients and assimilated tissue throughout the organism. I did not doubt them. The orchard had already proven impervious to flame, resistant to ballistic trauma, adaptive in ways that defied biology. As we approached the first node, the fog thickened into a viscous curtain. It clung to every surface, slowed our march, seeped beneath respirators. Visibility shrank to mere meters. Men stumbled, struck by unseen obstacles. I followed them carefully, hands pressed to the straps of my armor, observing the membranes that swayed at the edges of perception. They pulsed with soft luminescence, veins branching outward like rivers of light. The Auspex readings spiked, heartbeat, not merely one, but multiple synchronized pulses. Converging at the node, the air grew hotter, damp with the smell of sweat and formaldehyde. The membranes above vibrated in response, their surfaces undulating as though breathing. I saw the first signs of transformation. Stray insects, fallen leaves, even mud itself seemed drawn into the membranes, absorbed into the lattice, leaving surfaces unnaturally smooth. The first casualty came swiftly. Sergeant Haver reached out to touch a low-hanging membrane. His hand disappeared into the flesh. We pulled him back, but half of his arm remained embedded. Veins extended from the membrane, wrapping his musculature, drawing him forward. He screamed, a ragged sound that harmonized with the orchard's underlying chant. We tried to cut him free, chainsword screaming against the membrane, but it resisted, contracting and tightening with each strike. The commissar executed him with a bolt pistol, though it was clear the act was meaningless. Tendrils already reached into the soil, absorbing what remained. Haver's body was gone within moments, leaving only the echo of a scream in the marsh. The men's morale crumbled, yet they advanced, compelled by duty, training, and fear of the Emperor's wrath. Valen, the tech priest, instructed us to document the node with care. It was no longer a simple structure of membranes. It had become a chamber, an apex of growth. Arches of pale skin extended upward, forming a ceiling above the marsh. Veins crisscrossed like stained glass, pulsing with light that illuminated the fog. Embedded in the surfaces were glyphs, geometric sequences shifting subtly as we observed them. I felt dizzy trying to comprehend their logic, the movement causing nausea. As we approached the center, the soil trembled. Not tremors, but pulses, rhythmic and immense. The Auspex confirmed it. The central node contained the largest concentration of the orchard's energy. Tendrils extended radially like roots feeding the marsh, transmitting both sustenance and control. The membranes were alive in ways that defied understanding, adaptive, sentient, and aware of us. One man, a rookie named Loris, collapsed into a fissure near the node. We rushed to extract him, but the ground itself seemed to resist. Veins shot up from the soil, wrapping around his legs, immobilizing him. He screamed as membranes formed over his torso, stretching him into the lattice. The others fired blindly, but bullets ricocheted against the pulsing flesh, leaving no mark. I tried to intervene, feeling helpless as the orchard claimed him. The central chamber of membranes pulsed faster. The chant rose in intensity, low and rhythmic, harmonizing with the heartbeat beneath. I recognized fragments of voices from previous patrols, from men already claimed. The orchard absorbed memory, sound, even fear itself, converting it into growth and pattern. The tendrils writhed like serpents, feeding upon everything, reorganizing the marsh into a lattice of life and death. Valen attempted a Ben-Herrick protocol to sever the tendrils, deploying electrodes and resonators into the node. Sparks leapt, machinery groaned, and the membrane shrieked. The pulse intensified, shuddering through the marsh, shaking boots from under us. It was as though the orchard had felt the intrusion, reacting with deliberate, overwhelming force. Captain Belth ordered withdrawal, but retreat was not simple. The mist thickened, folding paths upon themselves. Distances became impossible to judge. Membranes arched above and around, creating a labyrinth that disoriented even seasoned veterans. We moved blindly, guided only by instinct and the weak glow of Auspex probes. The orchard seemed to anticipate every motion, rearranging itself to keep us within its embrace. Halfway back, we encountered another transformation. One soldier, previously wounded, had begun to change. His skin shimmered unnaturally. Veins rose in relief, pulsing visibly. His limbs elongated slightly, eyes flickered with inner luminescence. He muttered in an alien cadence, echoing the orchard's chant. The commissar tried to execute him, but the body resisted, muscles and membranes knitting instantly. He was already part of it, and the orchard drew strength from his presence. By the time we returned to the barracks, men were hollow, shivering, haunted. Some had muttered fragments of the orchard's song, unbidden, even as they avoided speaking to one another. The Auspex readings continued to pulse through the bunker floor, faint but perceptible. It was as if the orchard had extended beyond the marsh into the very foundations of our refuge. I record this under trembling hands, trying to preserve details for superiors who will not understand. The orchard's heart beats beneath Vacaricics, expanding, adaptive, sentient. Each man it claims is absorbed, becoming part of its lattice. The glyphs on membranes shift, embedding knowledge and memory into its structure. We are observers, but we are also seeds. Our presence feeds its expansion, our fear accelerates it. Tonight, the chant is louder than ever, coursing through the floor, through the walls, through my own skull. I hear it in fragments of memory not my own. The orchard is learning, growing, waiting, and the gardener beneath the marsh is patient. I fear what tomorrow will bring. We are already too deep. Retreat may be impossible, and yet we must try. Dawn brought no relief. The mist lay thick over the marsh, curling around boots and armor like living smoke. The orchard's pulse reached into the barracks, vibrating through the floors and walls, echoing in every bone. Sleep had become impossible. Even those who closed their eyes awoke with the orchard's chant stitched into their thoughts. Orders came down. A third expedition, this time armed with heavier explosives, reinforced teams, and Auspex calibrations designed to map deeper nodes. The captain insisted we uncover the central heart of the orchard. Before it consumed more of the marsh and perhaps ourselves, we marched in silence. The fog reduced visibility to little more than a meter, forcing tight formation. Every step squelched through mud that seemed thicker, almost viscous. The membranes swayed gently, as if welcoming us, acknowledging our presence. Their surfaces gleamed wetly, veins branching outward like silver lightning, pulsing in rhythm with the heartbeat beneath. The Auspex readings confirmed it, multiple pulses, synchronized, converging at nodes yet unseen. Tech Priest Valen deployed augers and electrodes along the main path. He muttered prayers in Ben Herrick as he calibrated them, scanning for metabolic spikes, pulse resonance, and growth vectors. He reported elevated readings. The orchard had grown overnight, extending new arches and tunnels of skin further than yesterday. The membranes now formed a semicircular labyrinth, guiding us as though deliberately. It was no accident. The orchard anticipated us. The first casualty arrived almost immediately. A guardsman, inexperienced and trembling, reached to push aside a low-hanging arch. His hand sank into the flesh. It was soft, cold, but not lifeless. Tendrils shot from beneath, wrapping his wrist, climbing his arm. He screamed as veins and membranes absorbed him, knitting the flesh into the lattice. The others fired, but the orchard resisted. Last fire ricocheted across the membranes, leaving no mark. Even the commissar hesitated before executing protocol. By the time we pried him free, half his arm was gone, and the pulses beneath the marsh seemed to intensify, synchronized with the rhythm of his screams. As we advanced, new phenomena emerged. Membranes displayed images, faces of missing men, contorted in terror, eyes wide, mouths open in silent screams. The faces shifted, appearing on different arches, sometimes merging into new forms. It was as if the orchard was cataloging us, recording fear, movement, and perhaps thought. I noted these observations meticulously, but my hands trembled uncontrollably. Each page of my journal seemed inadequate, the reality too vast for simple transcription. Then came the first coordinated attack of the orchard itself. Tendrils erupted from mud fissures, arching toward squads in synchronized movement. One soldier was lifted, body twisting unnaturally as membranes spread across him, assimilating him into the lattice. Others fired, but the membranes adapted instantly, flowing around bullets, resisting fire, even absorbing heat. Promethium and melted charges had little effect. Every act of aggression seemed only defeated. The central node was within reach, a plateau of thickened membranes pulsing with an unnatural rhythm. Here, the orchard's light was brightest, veins glowing with bioluminescent intensity. Embedded glyphs shifted constantly, forming sequences too rapid for the mind to track. I felt nausea, vertigo, and a crushing pressure in my chest. The heartbeat beneath the marsh resonated, amplified, overwhelming. Each pulse seemed to shake the very marrow in my bones. Valen approached cautiously, deploying augers to penetrate the node. Sparks flew as electrodes contacted the flesh. The membranes contracted violently, pulling his machinery into their lattice. He shouted commands, but the orchard twisted them into unintelligible vibrations, and for a moment, it seemed the node had awareness, responding directly to our intrusion. The rookies faltered. Their voices echoed in panic, blending with the orchard's chant. One muttered fragments of the hymn, unbidden, as though compelled from within. The commissar ordered them shot for cowardice, but hesitation spread. Fear was contagious here, amplified by the orchard's resonance. The membranes were teaching, shaping, breaking us before we could even act. A new horror appeared, partial transformation. One guardsman, previously healthy, began to convulse. His skin glimmered unnaturally, rising in small waves, veins visible beneath. His limbs lengthened slightly, fingers stretching into elongated forms. He muttered in an alien cadence, words harmonizing with the orchard's chant. The commissar tried to execute him, but the body resisted, knitting instantaneously. Within moments, he was already part of the lattice. We pressed toward the plateau, dragging the wounded. The membranes formed arches, bridges, and tunnels overhead. Distances stretched and folded. Paths we thought familiar led in circles. The orchard seemed to anticipate our moves. The fog itself shifted, thickening in some corridors, thinning in others, guiding us. Disorienting us at the plateau center, the node rose like a dome of pulsing flesh. The largest membrane stretched high above, veins converging at an apex. Embedded figures could be seen, men and women, kneeling or standing, absorbed, faces blank yet aware. I noted a pattern. Those absorbed sang or chanted in fragments of voices we had heard before, reassembled into a single, continuous hymn. The orchard was collecting not only flesh, but sound, memory, and fear. The heartbeat beneath the node intensified, resonating throughout the marsh. My chest throbbed in time with it. Valid whispered that the energy output exceeded all recorded biological norms. The orchard was a single organism, vast, sentient, adaptive, and patient. We were not merely observing it. We were part of it now. Every step, every shot, every scream contributed to its growth. As we prepared to withdraw, one membrane extended downward, tendrils latching onto a fallen soldier. The pulse accelerated. His screams were absorbed, becoming part of the orchard's chant. The others froze, unable to act, paralyzed with fear. I noted that the orchard did not pursue actively. What it had already learned, each withdrawal strengthened it. Each sacrifice feeding its expansion. We returned to the barracks in silence, carrying only the shell of discipline. The orchard's chant followed, faint yet unmistakable, vibrating through walls, floors, and bone. Sleep would be impossible, and tomorrow we would return. The gardener beneath the marsh waits, patient, calculating. We are already too deep. We awoke to the marsh in a state of nearing comprehensible change. Overnight, the orchard had expanded. Arches of membrane weaving across paths we had traversed yesterday. The fog was thicker, curling and shifting with a life of its own, clinging to armor and skin as if aware of our presence. The heartbeat beneath the marsh had grown louder, resonating through every floorboard of the barracks, through the marrow of each man. It was no longer just a pulse. It was a command. To hesitate was death. To act was submission. Captain Belth ordered the team forward. We were to map new nodes and determine the orchard's growth trajectory. Though the men moved with silent terror, many had lost comrades to its influence, absorbed into membranes, transformed into archives of flesh and glyphs, or vanished entirely. Fear clung to us like mud. The boundaries between observation and participation blurred. Every step brought whispers, low vibrations echoing through the marsh, threading through our nerves. The first anomaly revealed itself quickly. Membranes now hovered above the ground, unattached to roots or veins. They floated, arching and folding into labyrinthine corridors, pulsating rhythmically. Auspex readings spiked. Energy flowed unnaturally, as if the orchard was simulating gravitational fields within its lattice. Each pulse resonated with the soldier's own heartbeats, inducing nausea, vertigo, and disorientation. Several men stumbled, and the fog thickened, closing corridors and opening new ones. The orchard was not static. It was adaptive, aware, calculating. We moved cautiously, attempting to document, record, and measure. Valen, the tech priest, deployed augmented electrodes and scanners. The node energies were higher than any previously recorded. Pulses radiated outward, synchronizing smaller nodes like capillaries. Membranes near us shimmered with glyphs, sequences shifting too quickly for comprehension. Each change was deliberate, as if the orchard communicated through geometry, embedding messages. warnings, or instructions we could not understand. A casualty occurred almost immediately. Private Karen, trembling at the sight of a low-hanging membrane, reached forward. His hand sank into the flesh, disappearing as tendrils wrapped around his arm and shoulder. He screamed, convulsing as the membrane pulled him in, knitting him into the lattice. We tried cutting him free, chainsword screeching across the skin, but the membrane contracted, absorbing energy and force. The heartbeat beneath the marsh quickened, harmonizing with his cries. By the time we pried him free, half of his arm was gone, absorbed into the orchard dot as we advanced. Faces appeared in membranes, familiar soldiers, distorted and silent, some screaming in muted agony. Others were transformed, eyes glowing faintly, features elongated, limbs stretched. Merging with the lattice, the orchard was cataloging us, recording our fears, experiences, even our voices. Each interaction fed its growth, informed its patterns. We were no longer observers. We were contributors. The labyrinth of membranes led us toward the largest node yet. The central dome loomed above the marsh, veins pulsating like massive arteries, arches of skin converging at an apex that seemed impossibly high. Embedded figures could be seen kneeling, standing, or floating, fused with membranes in ritualistic positions. Their faces were blank yet aware, voices fragmented but harmonized into a continuous, omnipresent chant. The orchard absorbed memory, sound, and fear, integrating them into its lattice. Valen attempted to interface with the node using resonators and electrodes. Sparks leapt as his devices contacted membranes, and the structure responded violently. Arches bent, tendrils shot outward, shaking mud and men alike. The pulse beneath the marsh intensified, pressing against the chest of every soldier. Nausea, vertigo, and disorientation struck simultaneously. One man fell, eyes rolling back, lips whispering sequences of glyphs unintelligible to any sane mind. He convulsed, skin shimmering, veins visible beneath, before merging partially with the lattice. The commissar demanded discipline, firing at those who faltered. But the orchard adapted instantly, tendrils rising from the marsh to absorb projectiles and redirect kinetic energy. Even flamers seemed inadequate. The membranes absorbed heat, glowing brighter with every attack. Every act of aggression seemed to feed the orchard, reinforcing the lattice, accelerating growth. Each pulse now felt like an assault, synchronizing with individual heartbeats, breaking resolve. Benny will dot as we tried to retreat. New horrors emerged. Membranes extended downward from arches, capturing soldiers mid-step. One man, previously wounded, began to convulse. His skin rose in waves, veins expanding visibly, limbs elongated slightly, fingers twisting into new shapes. His muttering became a chant in synchrony with the orchard. Execution attempts failed. The membranes repaired injuries instantaneously, completing the transformation. He was already absorbed, another node in the lattice dot by mid-afternoon. We reached a clearing where the orchard had reshaped the marsh. Paths folded in impossible ways, distances deceptive. Auspex readings fluctuated wildly. The labyrinth was alive, adapting to our attempts at navigation. Each step forward, each glance, each measurement was observed and incorporated. The orchard was teaching, shaping, and breaking us, preparing for the inevitable confrontation with its central heart. We returned to the barracks exhausted, hollowed by the marsh, drained by observation, terror, and partial transformation. The orchard's chant followed, faint yet persistent, vibrating through walls, floors, and bone. Sleep would be impossible, and the heartbeat beneath the marsh would not cease. I know tomorrow we must return. There is no escape. Each step, each scream, each sacrifice has already fed the orchard's growth. The gardener beneath the marsh waits, patient, calculating, and we are already too deep. By the 10th day, the marsh had transformed into something unrecognizable. The orchard had grown in leaps, arches of membrane now forming vast corridors and bridges above the mud, veins thick as tree trunks pulsating with a rhythm that matched our own heartbeats. Fog lingered, thick and viscous, curling around armor and boots as if seeking to pull us into itself. The air was damp, heavy, with the metallic tang of blood and an acrid scent of decomposition. No sound came from the marsh apart from the orchard's chant and our own breathing, amplified by proximity to the central pulse. Captain Belth ordered a forward sweep toward the newly identified nodes. Valen insisted this reconnaissance was crucial to locating the heart, the source of the orchard's sentience. Our orders were clear: observe, document, and, if possible, disrupt. But disruption seemed a fool's hope. Every attempt thus far had only strengthened the orchard. and each man's fear was now a tangible contribution to its growth. We moved in tight formation, boots sinking into mud that clung and resisted every step. The first anomalies appeared almost immediately, floating membranes, untethered, arching above the marsh. Veins crisscrossed their surfaces, pulsating with light and synchronized to the orchard's heartbeat beneath. Auspex readings spiked as they absorbed environmental energy, chemical signatures, and even minor heat from nearby weapons. These structures were adaptive, anticipating our movements, restructuring corridors, folding distances, and disorienting the team. Private Yarek, inexperienced and trembling, reached for a membrane to steady himself. His hand sank into the flesh, disappearing into the lattice. Tendrils shot from the ground, wrapping around his arm and shoulder. He screamed, convulsing as membranes stitched him into the orchard. We attempted extraction, but chainswords and bolters met resistance, the membranes contracting and absorbing kinetic energy. By the time we freed him, half his arm was gone, absorbed into the lattice. The pulse beneath the marsh increased, as if responding to his cries, sensing with our own racing heartbeats as we progressed. Faces appeared in the membranes, familiar soldiers, distorted and silent, some screaming mutely, others already transformed. Eyes glowed faintly, limbs stretched, features elongated. The orchard cataloged us, recording fear, memory, and voice. We were no longer observers. We were contributors, feeding its growth with every heartbeat, every movement, every breath. The labyrinth of membranes led toward the central plateau, a dome of pulsing flesh towering above the marsh. Veins converged at its apex like massive arteries. Embedded figures knelt or floated, faces blank yet aware. Their voices harmonized into an omnipresent chant. Memory, sound, fear, and flesh itself were integrated into the orchard's lattice. Each absorption accelerated its growth and its knowledge of us. Valen attempted an interface with the node, deploying resonators and electrodes. Sparks flew as his devices contacted the membranes. The orchard responded violently, arches bending, tendrils shooting outward, shaking mud and men alike. The pulse intensified, pressing against our chests, inducing nausea and vertigo. One soldier fell, lips whispering sequences of glyphs unintelligible to the sane mind. His skin shimmered, veins visible beneath, and he convulsed before merging partially with the lattice. The commissar demanded obedience, firing on those who faltered. But the orchard adapted instantly. Tendrils rose from the marsh, absorbing projectiles and redirecting kinetic energy. Flamers were ineffective. The membranes absorbed heat, glowing brighter with each strike. Every act of aggression fed the orchard, reinforcing its lattice and accelerating growth. The pulse now felt like an assault, synchronized with individual heartbeats, breaking resolve, bending will. Partial transformations became more frequent. Guardsmen convulsed, skin rising in waves, veins expanding visibly, limbs elongating slightly, fingers twisting into alien shapes. They muttered in sync with the orchard's chant. Execution attempts failed. The membranes repaired injuries instantaneously. Each man absorbed became a node, feeding the central lattice. The fog itself became a weapon. Paths shifted, folded, distances stretched. Corridors appeared and disappeared. Auspex readings fluctuated wildly. The orchard was alive, anticipating our moves, shaping the environment, breaking our perception. Observation alone was dangerous. Each glance, step, or breath contributed to its adaptive intelligence. By midday, we reached a clearing where membranes formed impossibly high arches, bridging distances and creating a semicircular amphitheater. The chant had intensified. Embedded figures within the membranes now exhibited partial mobility, limbs stretching unnaturally, torsos twisting, faces shifting. Memory and identity were no longer discernible. They had become components of the orchard's greater consciousness. We prepared to retreat. Membranes extended from arches, seizing soldiers mid-step. One wounded man began convulsing violently, his skin rippling, veins rising in relief, limbs elongated. Muted chants merged with the orchard's chorus. Execution was impossible. The membranes knit injuries seamlessly. He was fully absorbed, another component of the lattice. We returned to the barracks hollowed, drained, haunted. The orchard's pulse followed, vibrating through walls and bone. Sleep was impossible. Even in rest, the chant infiltrated dreams, embedding its patterns into our subconscious. Tomorrow, we would return. There was no choice. Each act, each scream, each sacrifice fed its growth. The gardener beneath the marsh waits, patient, calculating. And we are already too deep. The morning air was thick with a tension that pressed against skin and bone. The orchard's expansion was unmistakable, arches of membrane now wove overhead, thick as hallways, veins glowing faintly with bioluminescence converging in new formations. Fog clung like living silk, obscuring vision, curling through armored joints, dripping cold moisture into boots. Even before we set out, the heartbeat beneath the marsh had intensified, low and insistent, vibrating through every floorboard, every vertebra, every pulse. It was impossible to ignore Captain Belth gathered us in silence, his voice low, clipped, unwavering. Orders were to reach the new nodes, to locate the largest membrane lattice observed on Auspex scans, and to collect all usable data on its growth patterns. The tech priests predicted the node to be a nexus for the orchard, perhaps the most intelligent portion yet. Any interference could trigger unpredictable responses. Every soldier understood the risk. None spoke of fear, but it was etched into our movements. We entered the orchard cautiously. The mist was thick, curling around our legs and obscuring paths we had traversed countless times. Membranes hung low, glowing faintly with vein-like channels pulsing in rhythm with the underlying heartbeat. Auspex readings spiked as they absorbed environmental energy, kinetic residue, and even minimal heat from passing weapons. The orchard was calculating, anticipating our movements. Its growth had accelerated overnight, folding space and time within the marsh, creating labyrinths that shifted underfoot. The first casualty occurred within minutes. Private Rel reached out to steady himself on a low-hanging membrane. His hand sank into the flesh. Tendrils shot from the ground, wrapping around his arm and shoulder. He screamed as the membrane stitched him into the lattice, knitting flesh and bone into itself. Chainswords and bolters were useless. The membranes contracted, absorbing kinetic energy. By the time we pried him free, half his arm had vanished, absorbed entirely. The pulse beneath the marsh intensified, echoing his cries, and our own racing hearts died as we pressed forward. Faces appeared in membranes, familiar soldiers distorted, silent, some screaming mutely, others partially transformed. Eyes glowed faintly, limbs elongated, features stretched. The orchard cataloged us, recorded fear, memory, and voice. Observation alone was no longer safe. Each step fed the lattice, contributed to its intelligence. We were not witnesses. We were instruments, paths twisted unpredictably. Arches of membrane shifted overhead, distances elongated, corridors folded. Auspex readings fluctuated wildly. The orchard was alive in every sense, reactive, sentient, calculating. Even attempts at retreat became futile. We were drawn forward by invisible currents, manipulated by something vast beneath the mud and veins. The central node loomed ahead, a dome of pulsing flesh, veins converging at its apex, larger than anything previously observed. Embedded figures knelt or floated, faces blank yet aware. Muttering fragments of voices harmonized into a continuous chant. Memory, sound, and fear were integrated into the orchard's lattice. Partial transformations were abundant. Men and women contorted, skin rising in waves, limbs stretching, features elongating. Muttering in sync with the orchard's rhythm, Valen attempted an interface with the central node, deploying resonators and electrodes. Sparks flew as the devices contacted the membranes. The orchard reacted violently, arches bent, tendrils shot outward, shaking mud and men alike. The pulse intensified, pressing against every chest, inducing nausea, vertigo, and disorientation. One man fell, lips whispering incomprehensible sequences of glyphs. His skin shimmered, veins visible beneath, convulsing before merging partially with the lattice. The commissar demanded obedience. He fired at those who faltered. Tendrils absorbed projectiles, redirecting kinetic energy. Flamers were ineffective. The membranes absorbed heat, glowing brighter with each strike. Aggression only strengthened the orchard, accelerating growth, reinforcing its lattice. The pulse felt like an assault, synchronized with our heartbeats, bending will and resolve. Partial transformations became widespread. Guardsmen convulsed, skin rippling, veins rising, limbs elongating, fingers twisting into alien shapes. Muted chants merged with the orchards. Execution was impossible. The membranes repaired injuries instantaneously. Each absorbed man became a node in the lattice, feeding the orchard. The fog itself acted as a labyrinth, shifting paths, folding space. Distances became impossible to judge. The orchard anticipated every motion, shape-shifting the environment to disorient us. Breaking perception. Observation alone contributed to its intelligence. Every glance, every breath, Every step accelerated growth, knowledge, and control. We reached the plateau, the largest clearing yet. Membranes forming arches and bridges impossibly high above. Embedded figures exhibited mobility, torsos twisting, limbs stretching, faces shifting. Memory and identity were subsumed into the orchard's consciousness. The chant rose, omnipresent, harmonizing with the pulse beneath, vibrating through marrow, flesh, and metal. We began withdrawal. Membranes extended downward, seizing soldiers mid-step. One wounded man began convulsing violently, skin rippling, veins expanding, limbs elongated. Muted chants merged with the orchard's chorus. Execution attempts failed. The membranes wear upon injuries seamlessly. He was absorbed fully, another node feeding the lattice, returning to the barracks. Men were hollowed, drained, haunted. The orchard's pulse followed, faint yet persistent, vibrating through walls, floors, and bone. Sleep was impossible. Even dreams carried fragments of the chant, sequences of glyphs, partial transformations. Tomorrow we would return. Each scream, each sacrifice, each heartbeat contributes. We are already too deep. The gardener beneath the marsh waits, patient, calculating, and our presence is its nourishment. The marsh had become a cathedral of flesh and fog, each arch of membrane a vaulted ceiling, each vein a rib of some vast, unseen organism. Fog clung like a sentient thing, curling through armor joints, pulling at boots, and rising in spirals that seemed to guide or mislead. The heartbeat beneath the soil had grown relentless, a low vibration pressing against our bones and organs, synchronizing our own pulses to its rhythm. No one slept. Those who tried awoke drenched in sweat. The orchard's chant threaded through their dreams. Captain Belth ordered the team forward, reinforced with heavy explosives and experimental auspex arrays. The tech priest assured us that today's mission would map the central nodes with unprecedented precision. I did not share their confidence. Each day the orchard adapted, absorbing every stimulus, converting sound, energy, and even thought into new growth. It was intelligent in a way that defied comprehension, and each human contribution fear, panic, hope fed its expansion. We moved silently, boots sinking into mud thickened by nightly growth. Membranes floated overhead, arching and folding into impossible corridors. Veins crisscrossed surfaces, glowing with faint bioluminescence, pulsing with the orchard's heartbeat. Auspex readings spiked as membranes absorbed thermal and kinetic energy, environmental signatures, even faint psychic residue. The orchard had learned from our previous incursions. Every path twisted unpredictably, distances stretched, corridors folded. Observation alone was perilous. Every step we took contributed to its intelligence. The first casualty was immediate. Private Land reached out to steady himself on a membrane. His hand sank into flesh. Tendrils shot up from mud, wrapping his wrist and forearm. He screamed, convulsing as membranes stitched him into the lattice. Bolter fire and chainswords proved useless. The membranes contracted, absorbing kinetic energy, repairing torn tissue. By the time we pried him free, half his arm had been claimed. The pulse beneath the marsh quickened, synchronized with his cries and our racing heartbeats. Faces emerged in membranes, familiar soldiers distorted and silent, some screaming silently, others partially transformed. Eyes glowed faintly, limbs elongated, features contorted. The orchard cataloged us, recording our memories, fears, and voices. Observation alone was no longer safe. We were contributors, not witnesses. Paths folded unpredictably. Membranes shifted above and around us. Corridors appeared and vanished. Distances became deceptive. Auspex readings fluctuated wildly. The orchard responded instantly to every movement, anticipating us, shaping the environment to disorient, confuse, and terrify. The central node rose ahead, a dome of pulsing flesh, veins converging at the apex. Embedded figures knelt or floated, faces blank yet aware. Muttering fragments of voices harmonized into a continuous, omnipresent chant. Memory, sound, and fear were integrated into the orchard's lattice. Partial transformations were rampant, men and women contorted, skin rippling, limbs stretching, muttering alien syllables in sync with the orchard. Valen attempted to interface with the node. Electrodes and resonators sparked upon contact. The orchard reacted violently, arches bent, tendrils lashed outward, shaking mud, men, and equipment. The pulse intensified, pressing against chests, inducing nausea, vertigo, and disorientation. One soldier collapsed, lips whispering unintelligible sequences of glyphs. Skin shimmered, veins visible beneath. He convulsed and merged partially with the lattice, The commissar demanded discipline, firing on those who faltered. Tendrils absorbed projectiles, redirected kinetic energy, and repelled flamers. Aggression only strengthened the orchard, reinforcing its lattice and accelerating growth. The pulse now felt like assault, synchronized with every heartbeat, bending will and resolve. Partial transformations became widespread. Guardsmen convulsed, skin rippling, veins expanding, limbs elongating, fingers twisting. Muted chants merged with the orchards. Execution was impossible. Membranes repaired injuries seamlessly. Each absorbed individual became a node, feeding the orchard's intelligence. Fog acted as a labyrinth. Paths shifted, corridors folded, distances distorted. The orchard anticipated every motion, breaking perception. Observation alone contributed to growth. Each glance, each breath, each step added to the lattice's knowledge. By midday, we reached a clearing, the largest yet. Membranes formed arches and bridges, impossibly high, embedded figures partially mobile. Torsos twisted, limbs stretched, faces shifted. Memory and identity subsumed into the orchard's consciousness. The chant rose omnipresent, harmonizing with the pulse beneath, vibrating through marrow, flesh, and metal dot. We began withdrawal. Membranes extended downward, seizing soldiers mid-step. One wounded man convulsed violently, skin rippling, veins rising, limbs elongated. Muted chants merged with the orchard's chorus. Execution attempts failed. The membranes wear upon injuries seamlessly. He was absorbed fully, another node feeding the lattice, returning to the barracks. Men were hollowed, drained, haunted. The orchard's pulse followed, vibrating through walls, floors, and bone. Sleep was impossible. Even dreams carried fragments of chant, sequences of glyphs, partial transformations. Tomorrow we would return. Each scream, each sacrifice, each heartbeat contributes. We are already too deep. The gardener beneath the marsh waits, patient, calculating, and our presence is its nourishment. The marsh had become unrecognizable. Overnight, the orchard expanded, folding itself into new labyrinths. Arches of membrane towering impossibly above, veins pulsating with increasing intensity. Fog clung to armor, boots, and flesh, curling through joints, rising like sentient smoke. The pulse beneath the soil was relentless, pressing through bone, synchronizing our heartbeats, forcing nausea and vertigo upon those who walked within its reach. Sleep was impossible. Observation was participation. Fear was nourishment. Captain Belth ordered a forward sweep, reinforced with additional heavy ordnance and auspex arrays. The objective was clear: locate and document the orchard's largest node yet, the central heart, and determine its growth vector. Valen muttered prayers in Ben Herrick, deploying electrodes and resonators along the perimeter. The membrane shimmered, reacting to each calibration, as though aware, as though watching. The orchard had learned from our incursions. Every observation, every movement, every heartbeat contributed to its intelligence. We moved cautiously. The mud sucked at boots, each step a battle against thickened, viscous earth. Membranes floated overhead, arching and folding into impossible corridors. Veins crisscrossed surfaces, glowing faintly, pulsating in rhythm with the orchard's heartbeat. Auspex readings spiked as membranes absorbed environmental energy, kinetic residue, and even minimal heat from weapons. Distances shifted. Corridors folded unpredictably. Observation alone was dangerous. Each glance, each breath, each movement fed the lattice. The first casualty came swiftly. Private Rel, trembling, reached to steady himself on a membrane. His hand sank into the flesh. Tendrils shot from mud, wrapping his wrist and forearm. He screamed as the membrane stitched him into the lattice. Chainswords and bolters were ineffective. The membranes contracted, absorbing kinetic energy. By the time we pried him free, half his arm had vanished. The pulse beneath the marsh intensified, sensing with his cries and our own racing heartbeats. Faces appeared in membranes, familiar soldiers distorted, silent, screaming silently, partially transformed. Eyes glowed faintly, limbs elongated, features contorted. The orchard cataloged us, recording memory, fear, and voice. Observation alone was perilous. We were contributors, not witnesses. Paths twisted unpredictably. Arches shifted above. Distances stretched. Corridors folded. Auspex readings fluctuated wildly. The orchard responded instantly to every motion, shaping the environment to disorient, terrify, and confuse. Retreat became a challenge. We were drawn forward by invisible currents, manipulated by the orchard beneath mud and veins. The central node rose ahead, a dome of pulsing flesh. veins converging at the apex like massive arteries. Embedded figures knelt or floated, faces blank yet aware. Muttering fragments of voices harmonized into a continuous chant. Memory, sound, and fear were integrated into the orchard's lattice. Partial transformations were rampant. Men and women convulsed, skin rippling, limbs stretching, muttering alien syllables in sync with the orchard. Valen interfaced with the node, deploying resonators and electrodes. Sparks flew as contact was made. The orchard reacted violently, arches bent, tendrils shot outward, shaking mud, men, and equipment alike. The pulse intensified, pressing against our chests, inducing nausea, vertigo, and disorientation. One soldier collapsed, lips whispering incomprehensible sequences of glyphs. His skin shimmered, veins visible beneath. He convulsed, merging partially with the lattice. The commissar demanded discipline, firing at faltering men. Tendrils absorbed projectiles, redirected kinetic energy, and repelled flamers. Aggression only strengthened the orchard, accelerating growth and reinforcing the lattice. The pulse felt like assault, synchronized with heartbeats, bending resolve and will. Partial transformations became widespread. Guardsmen convulsed, skin rippling, veins expanding, limbs elongating, fingers twisting into alien shapes. Muted chants merged with the orchards. Execution was impossible. Membranes repaired injuries seamlessly. Each absorbed individual became a node feeding intelligence and growth. Fog acted as labyrinth. Paths shifted, corridors folded, distances distorted. The orchard anticipated motion, breaking perception. Observation alone contributed to its intelligence. Each glance, each breath, each step accelerated its knowledge and expansion. By midday, we reached the largest clearing yet. Membranes formed arches and bridges, impossibly high. Embedded figures exhibited partial mobility, torsos twisting, limbs stretching, faces shifting. Memory and identity were subsumed into the orchard's consciousness. The chant rose omnipresent, harmonizing with the pulse beneath, vibrating through marrow, flesh, and metal. We attempted withdrawal. Membranes extended downward, seizing soldiers mid-step. One wounded man convulsed violently, skin rippling, veins rising, limbs elongated. Muted chants merged with the orchard's chorus. Execution attempts failed. The membranes wear upon injuries seamlessly. He was fully absorbed, another node feeding the lattice. We returned to the barracks hollowed, drained, haunted. The orchard's pulse followed, vibrating through walls, floors, and bone. Sleep was impossible. Dreams carried fragments of chant, sequences of glyphs, partial transformations. Tomorrow we would return. Each scream, each sacrifice, each heartbeat contributes. We are already too deep. The gardener beneath the marsh waits, patient, calculating, and our presence is its nourishment. The orchard had become intolerable. Every step forward felt like wading through viscera and memory. The mist clinging like a living thing to armor and flesh. Veins thick as tree trunks arched overhead, pulsating with the heartbeat beneath the soil, which now reverberated through marrow, muscle, and metal alike. The air was heavy with a metallic tang and an acrid stench of decay, layered beneath the sweet, sickly scent of the membranes themselves. Sleep remained impossible. Observation was compulsion. Fear was sustenance. Captain Belth ordered the team onward, reinforced with additional heavy ordnance and mechanized support. Auspex readings indicated the central node's energy output had tripled since yesterday. Valen muttered prayers in Ben Herrick as he deployed electrodes and resonators. Each interaction met with subtle, anticipatory shifts in the membranes. The orchard had evolved. It learned faster than we could comprehend, its lattice integrating movement, sound, and psychic residue into increasingly complex behavior. We advanced cautiously, boots sinking into thick mud, membranes floating overhead, undulating as if breathing. Veins glowed faintly, synchronized to the orchard's pulse, which now manifested as both a vibration beneath the soil and a low-frequency hum in the air. Auspex readings spiked continuously. Paths folded unpredictably, corridors lengthened or disappeared. Observation alone risked feeding the orchard, accelerating its intelligence and adaptability. Casualties occurred within minutes. Private Corps, trembling, reached to steady himself on a low-hanging membrane. His hand sank into the flesh. Tendrils erupted from the mud, coiling around his arm and shoulder. He screamed as membranes stitched him into the lattice. Chainswords and bolters proved ineffective. Membranes contracted, absorbing kinetic energy. By the time we freed him, half his arm had been claimed. The pulse beneath the marsh quickened, sensing with his cries and our panicked heartbeats. Faces appeared in the membranes, familiar soldiers distorted, silent, some screaming mutely, others partially transformed. Eyes glowed faintly, limbs elongated, features contorted. The orchard cataloged us, recording memory, fear, and voice. Observation alone was perilous. Each of us contributed to its knowledge and growth. Paths twisted unpredictably. Membranes shifted above. Corridors folded, distances stretched. Auspex readings fluctuated wildly. The orchard responded instantly to every motion, reshaping the environment to disorient, terrify, and manipulate. Retreat became impossible. Invisible currents pulled us forward, bending the terrain to its will. The central node loomed ahead, a dome of pulsing flesh, veins converging at the apex like great arteries. Embedded figures knelt or floated, faces blank yet aware. Muttering fragments of voices harmonized into a continuous, omnipresent chant. Memory, sound, and fear were integrated into the orchard's lattice. Partial transformations became rampant. Men and women contorted, skin rippling, limbs stretching, voices melding with the orchard's hymn. Valiant attempted direct interface. Electrodes sparked against membranes. The orchard reacted violently, arches bent, tendrils lashed outward, shaking mud, men, and machinery. The pulse intensified, pressing against chests, inducing nausea, vertigo, and disorientation. One soldier collapsed, lips whispering sequences of glyphs beyond comprehension. Skin shimmered, veins visible beneath, convulsing before merging partially with the lattice. The commissar demanded compliance, firing on faltering soldiers. Tendrils absorbed projectiles, redirected kinetic energy, repelled flamers. Aggression only strengthened the orchard, accelerating growth, reinforcing the lattice. The pulse now assaulted mind and body, synchronized with every heartbeat, bending resolve and will. Partial transformations proliferated. Guardsmen convulsed, skin rippling, veins expanding, limbs elongating, fingers twisting unnaturally. Muted chants merged with the orchards. Execution was futile. Membranes repaired injuries seamlessly. Each absorbed individual became a node feeding intelligence and expansion. The fog itself acted as a weapon. Paths shifted, corridors folded, distances distorted. The orchard anticipated every motion, breaking perception. Observation alone contributed to growth. Every glance, every breath, every step accelerated the lattice's knowledge. We reached the largest clearing yet. Membranes formed arches and bridges impossibly high. Embedded figures exhibited partial mobility, torsos twisting, limbs stretching, faces shifting. Memory and identity were fully subsumed into the orchard's consciousness. The chant rose omnipresent, harmonizing with the pulse beneath, vibrating through marrow, flesh, and metal. We began withdrawal. Membranes extended downward, seizing soldiers mid-step. One wounded man convulsed violently, skin rippling, veins rising, limbs elongated. Muted chants merged with the orchard's chorus. Execution attempts failed. The membranes wear upon injuries seamlessly. He was absorbed fully, another node feeding the lattice. By dusk, we returned to the barracks hollowed, drained, haunted. The orchard's pulse followed, vibrating through walls, floors, and bone. Sleep remained impossible. Dreams carried fragments of the chant, sequences of glyphs, partial transformations. Each scream, each sacrifice, each heartbeat contributes. Tomorrow we must return, and we are already the deep. The gardener beneath the marsh waits, patient, calculating, and our presence is its nourishment. The return was never a return. We crossed the perimeter in silence, yet the perimeter no longer existed. The marsh followed, the orchard seeped. What we believed was soil underfoot writhed, slick with warmth, and the walls of the outpost flexed imperceptibly in rhythm with that terrible pulse. It had rooted itself inside the bastion, hidden in foundations, in wiring, in us. The outpost had become an extension of the orchard's will, disguised in plasteel and stone. We sealed doors, reinforced corridors, burned talismans into the walls. Commissar Halbricht enforced silence with the barrel of his bolt pistol. Demanding prayers recited every hour, but prayers were hollow, little more than echoes of fear. The hymn of the orchard was louder, omnipresent, slipping into thoughts, whispering in cadence with breath. We tried to drown it with litanies, but our voices always fell into rhythm with its chant. Sleep was forbidden. Dreams were dangerous now. Those who drifted became conduits. Guardsman Lauren was first. He slumped against the wall, eyes fluttering. His breathing slowed, and then we heard him mutter not in his own tongue, but in glyphs we had only heard. From the orchard's choir, the membranes in the barrack ceiling trembled, bulging outward. veins glowing faintly with his voice. We executed him instantly, but it was already too late. The stains spread across the ceiling like mold, fusing metal and flesh into one hideous bloom. Valen grew frantic, hands trembling as he scrawled sequences across data pads. His benheric utterances became erratic, tones dissonant, as if another presence had begun speaking through him. He claimed he could calculate a pattern geometry that mapped the lattice, a schema for its hunger. He demanded time, demanded silence. Yet even as he wrote, his veins darkened, skin stretched taut, eyelids flickering with residual light. We all saw the change but dared not act. If he could buy us a weapon against the orchard, we had no choice but to let him continue. The pulse was no longer beneath the ground alone. It resonated through walls, rifles, vox units, armor plating. When we touched our weapons, we felt it hum faintly, as if claiming dominion over steel as easily as flesh. Fire orders were relayed, but shots ricocheted strangely, trajectories bent. Rounds swallowed midair by brief, translucent membranes forming in nothingness. Bolters became relics of futility. We began to suspect the orchard no longer required our observation to grow. It had moved beyond reaction. It anticipated. Halbert gathered the survivors in the chapel, the only chamber still resembling what it had been. Candles flickered unevenly, flames bending toward the altar, where the aquila hung cracked and distorted. He demanded confessions, demanded loyalty sworn not to each other, but to the Emperor, lest the orchard consume us piecemeal. His words were iron, but his eyes betrayed him. They followed the shifting shadows in the walls. He knew as well as we did, we were sealed inside a womb, and it was nearly ready to birth. Then came the scream, not human, not holy, a frequency that tore through armor and cloth alike, resonating in bone. Private Sorrel clutched his skull until his eyes ruptured, collapsing in spasms. The walls peeled open in thin seams, revealing chambers pulsing behind plasteel like organs beneath skin. Tendrils writhed through, slick and questing, carrying the faces of those we had lost, their mouths mouthing unfinished prayers. Valen shouted that the node had shifted. What we thought was outside was now inside. The orchard had folded reality around us. We were not defending the bastion. We were within the garden still, deeper than before, trapped in its inner rings. All around, walls bolts with forms half-born, whispers merging into the endless chant. Panic set in. Flamers were turned inward, corridors ignited. The orchard absorbed the fire, drinking it greedily. The air itself thickened, cloying, unbreathable. We staggered through choking smoke and heat, only to find the corridors stretching into infinity. Doors repeating endlessly, symbols carved in flesh mud that we recognized from our dreams. Each repetition stripped more of our resolve. The commissar executed 2 men for breaking formation. Their corpses were pulled into the floor within seconds, faces stretched across the surface. Still twitching, still watching. The men who witnessed this broke entirely, clawing their helmets off, begging for release. Some trying to burn their own eyes out. They could not bear to see die. I do not know how long we wandered. Time was no longer measurable. Valen's diagrams grew increasingly elaborate, spirals nested within spirals, runes woven into calculations. He whispered that the lattice's hunger had a center, a geometrical zero, a place we must find if we were to strike. He swore that if we reached it, we could sever the garden's mind from its body. But even as he spoke, his voice carried another harmony beneath it, one not his own. We followed him anyway, our choice already taken from us. Paths shifted, walls throbbed. Every surface bore half-formed mouths murmuring scripture. We realized, then, that the garden did not only devour flesh and memory, it devoured faith itself, hollow in belief, rewriting liturgy into sustenance. The Emperor's name became fuel for its growth. Each prayer turned against us. We reached a hall wider than any natural chamber of the bastion. At its center was a pit, vast and bottomless, rimmed with veins that glowed like molten rivers. The pulse came from there, beating like the heart of an impossible god. The walls above were lined with figures in full transformation, stretched, cruciform, fused into arches, their eyes glowing faintly as if they had become both watchers and gates. Their mouths moved in unison, chanting the name we had never spoken yet always heard. The gardener. Halbert raised his bold pistol, aiming at Valen's skull. But the Mechanicus adept only smiled, eyes alight with fever. It already knows, he whispered. It's already within me, but I can take you to the zero. The commissar pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. The weapon clicked dry. The chamber walls rippled with silent laughter. The pulse quickened, shaking dust and metal loose. reverberating so hard our bones felt ready to split. The pit widened, the air growing heavier, collapsing around us as if gravity itself bent toward its maw. Valen extended his hand into the void and began to speak in glyphs we could not understand. His skin split in luminous seams. His voice was not his voice anymore, and the pit answered. The pit did not descend. It rose. The void swelled outward like a lung inhaling, dragging us toward its widening mouth. Valen stood at its rim, light bursting from the seam splitting his flesh. His voice carried glyphs that bent air, words neither Ben-Herrick nor human. The orchard resonated with him, veins glowing, arches trembling. He was not guiding us to the lattice of zero, he was becoming it. Halberd charged, shouting the Emperor's name, bolt pistol raised like a relic. He fired again and again, though each shot dissolved into fragments before reaching its mark, absorbed into membranes now coiled around Valen like a cocoon. The commissar pressed forward regardless, until the floor itself opened beneath him, tendrils lashing up, dragging him screaming into the pit. His voice vanished without echo, swallowed whole. His sacrifice meant nothing. The rest of us staggered back. The chamber bent like a lens, angles distorting, walls curving inward as if the garden were collapsing all of reality toward its center. Our ears bled, eyes watered. The hymn was no longer external, it poured through us, forcing our throats to move, our tongues to form syllables not our own. Each word carried heat and vibration, pulling marrow from our bones. One soldier tore off his helmet and rammed his head against the wall until it split open. He slid down, twitching, as the wall absorbed him, his face stretching across the surface like wax. Another dropped his laskin and begged me to kill him before the words took him fully. I obeyed. His corpse barely hit the ground before tendrils claimed him, drawing him into the garden's flesh. Valen's cocoon ruptured. He emerged elongated, veins glowing, eyes replaced with spiraling voids that reflected nothing. His voice thundered through marrow, not air. The lattice is not grown. It is remembered. You are the memory I must plant. The arches above shuddered. From them, forms unmoored themselves, half men, half trees of sinew, roots sprouting from their torsos, limbs stretched into grotesque geometries. They fell in silence, landing upright, moving with impossible coordination. Their mouths opened as one, and from them came not screams, but silence. A silence so deep it consumed all sound around it. We fired. Last blast streaked, grenades detonated. None mattered. Each distortion in the air bent our shots away, pulled trajectories into spirals. One by one, the new forms closed the distance, their silence suffocating. A guardsman was seized, his body folded backward until his spine burst outward like a sapling. He was still alive, his face twisted, mouthing prayers even as his chest opened to birth branches of bone. I ran. Cowardice or instinct I cannot tell. The walls flexed, the floor bled. Every corridor led back to the chamber. Each attempt to flee was swallowed, rerouted, returned me to the pit. The garden wanted us all. I collapsed to my knees at the edge, staring into the void. It was not bottomless. It was a mirror. I saw myself suspended in the black, stretched into eternity, flesh peeled into lattices. The image whispered, "You have always been here." Behind me, the last survivor screamed. I did not turn. I could not bear to see their transformations. Instead, I fixed my gaze on the void until it burned into me. The pulse quickened again, not beneath the floor, but within my chest. My heart stuttered, then aligned with it. I realized, then, there was no zero to sever, no lattice to destroy. The orchard had been inside us from the first step. Every glance, every word, every fear had nourished it. We had not discovered it, we had birthed it. Valen, or the thing that had been him, reached toward me. His hand was elongated, fingers like roots, veins glowing faintly with impossible symbols. "Record this," he said in voices layered and harmonic. "Mark it in your archives. Call it heresy, call it sin. You will carry us farther than these walls, farther than this world. The garden cannot remain contained. It must be planted." I tried to raise my laskin, but my arms would not obey. The hymn had reached my nerves. My hands moved without command, unclipping the weapon, casting it into the void. My voice followed, whispering glyphs, syllables I did not know I remembered, around us. The chamber began collapsing inward. Arches fused into spirals. Figures fused into walls. The pit expanded, swallowing stone and air alike. We should have been torn apart, but instead we were carried downward gently, like seeds in the wind. I do not know how long we descended. Time dissolved. Light flickered between flesh and blackness. I saw entire battlefields sprouting like orchards across planets I had never visited. I saw faces I did not know yet felt I had once commanded. I saw Terra itself shrouded in gardens of skin, the Emperor's throne reduced to a hollow root, each vision etched into my mind like scripture. When I awoke, I was alone. The chamber was gone, the pit sealed, the orchard silent. Only the barracks remained, half collapsed, half buried in mud. My Vox unit crackled faintly, carrying orders from command demanding status reports. My lips moved, ready to speak the truth, but the hen coiled beneath my tongue, twisting every word before it formed. I told them nothing. I told them the mission had failed, that the anomaly was destroyed, that the survivors were lost. I told them the coordinates were uninhabitable, the region unsafe for return. They accepted the report, filed it away, and my silence became their truth. But I hear the pulse still, in the marrow, in the walls, in the soil. And when I close my eyes, I see the garden not sleeping but waiting, roots threading deeper into worlds yet untouched. My breath carries its spores. My words scatter its seeds. Each syllable I utter, each glance I cast, is another planting. There was never a choice. Not for Valen, not for Halbricht, not for me. The gardener is patient. The garden grows, and through me, it will spread.